Okay, let me go across to Pushparaj Deshpande, spokesperson of the Congress. Pushparaj, the criticism that has come in from the BJP and supporters of the BJP that the only reason the Congress party is interested and pushing for a caste census is because it wants to, A, counter the Hindutva mobilization happening from the BJP, and B, it essentially wants to create a political issue where there is further fragmentation and further polarization on the basis of caste here. There is no real development that or near a real action that we see once the caste census is out based on what we have seen in Karnataka so far. Why exactly then is the Congress party, specifically Mr. Rahul Gandhi, so insistent on the need for a caste census?
Hi, Tangshu. Thank you for having me on your show and congratulations on a very informative introduction. I really enjoyed it. And a very good evening to our panelists and viewers. See, firstly, India's founders forged the constitution to serve as a silver bullet against the graded inequalities of the past, which included casteism and communalism. It worked to some extent, but unfortunately, those social ills continue to be pervasive even today, which is why the Congress party believes that we need a caste census so we can recalibrate our social justice paradigm. Policies and governments are meant to be dynamic, not stagnant, unless, of course, you're in the BJP. Secondly, with regard to this entire debate, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If the BJP government conducts the caste census, which is a big if, given the government hasn't formally announced it or discussed it in Parliament, it would represent the India alliances and specifically leader of opposition Rahul Gandhi's victory. Because the BJP government first declined to conduct the caste census as an affidavit and filed in the Supreme Court on September 23, 2021, then again in Parliament on 3rd August 23, and then the BJP government handcuffed state governments from conducting caste-based surveys. This is on August 3, 2023, MOS Nityanand Rai for Home Affairs at that time. Now, this turnaround would be even more remarkable because Prime Minister Modi himself has characterized the caste census as an attempt to divide the country. But think about the normative shift this signals, because the Sangh Parivar is quietly burying two of its central policy planks that it has upheld for 3 decades, namely that of Samajik Samrasta and Satta, Sampatti and Sabman as vehicles of OBC empowerment. This U-turn is very telling. Now, the larger point is, with the substantive point here is, simply adding a column for enumerating the OBC caste in the infinitely delayed census is not what we are asking for. I mean, I'm very tempted to comment on how the census has been delayed for the first time in 100 years, but I will not deviate from the topic. We are asking for the enumeration of all castes, not just SC/STs, which was already being done, but also OBCs, DNT-NTs, and all general castes. We are demanding for a comprehensive caste census, not a moth-eaten partial caste census that the BJP is proposing. Why? Because only when we do a paranomic societal X-ray can we determine where structural fault lines are. The caste census is not just meant to know what the SC/ST and OBC population is, but to also understand what their socio-economic position is vis-a-vis general caste, and of course their education and employment status. Without a yardstick, how do you measure what the gaps are and how we address them? This becomes even more essential, as you said, Ritangshu, because the courts have been repeatedly asking for empirical data on caste for implementing OBC reservations in local bodies, for quota and decisions in government employment, and for various commissions. And finally, one last point. Only when we map the socio-economic positions of all castes can we further customize and deepen India's welfare schemes for the well-being of general castes. I mean, why should they be deprived of target efforts to plug shortfalls of Roti Kapra Makan or Sadak Bijli Pani or Jaan Jahan Jivika? Long story short, if Prime Minister Modi genuinely believes in Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, then, as you said, it is morally incumbent on him to allow the caste census, because by not doing so, not only would he be violating his own promise to the nation, but also shortchanging 80 to 85% of India's population. Back to you, Ritangshu.
Okay. Now, Pushparaj, you mentioned about the fact that the Union government in 2022 or 2023 said that they were not in favor of a caste census, which is why it will be a U-turn. I'm interested in the U-turn by the Congress party. I have dates of 3 surveys which the Congress party has released in its history. In 1953, Mr. was set up under Pandit Nehru. In 1955, submitted a report. The commission submitted a report, no action. There was one submitted in 1980 by the Morarji government, said Mandal Commission, which proposed 27% quota. Indira and Rajiv Gandhi did not heed on it. Then in 2011, the UPA too had commissioned the first caste census in 1947. However, that data was not released for as long as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in power. In fact, there is a debate from Parliament archives in 2011 where then Home Minister P. Chidambaram questions the fact that the word he used is vexed. There are several vexatious questions about what exactly is the definition of a caste and what is a caste, what is a subcaste, which is why it is humongously impossible to carry out. The question then is that if you're calling for a complete paradigm understanding of the socio-economic caste fault lines, which is why you're calling for all castes to be mentioned in the census, why did the Congress government, A, never initiate it seriously, or even when they did come up with half-hearted reports, they never took it the full mile?
That's a very good question, legitimate question. As I said, policies and governments are always meant to be dynamic, not stagnant. At the time, in the 50s, in the 60s, it was felt that the constitutional idea of India and the social justice paradigm enshrined in the constitution would be sufficient to address caste-based discrimination and casteism. That, of course, worked to some extent. But as you have seen, recent data, it has not been able to sufficiently address caste and caste-based discrimination, which is why there is a need to rethink policies and think of something, a new generation of social justice, a second generation social justice revolution. That is why we are even talking about a caste census. You're right. Number of governments.
But
did
then,
conduct
Pushparaj, the same defense can also be made. The same defense can also be given to the Modi government that their policies are evolving, which is why perhaps maybe a few years ago they did not feel the need for a caste census, and now they do feel so. So I don't understand why it is a matter of shame for the Modi government to come make a U-turn now, whereas it's not that for the Congress party. Let me then get in Manish Bariyar on this, because we don't have a lot of time. Mr. Bariyar, the point that the Congress spokesperson has mentioned is that there's no point having a half-hearted, just having a column on OBC along with a column on SC and ST. The counterpoint to that being that since we only have quotas for OBCs under the Mandal Commission, it makes sense to only get the data for the OBCs. We do not need a caste-based system. How does the BJP, how should the government respond to this demand coming in? Is there merit that if you have to go through the caste spectrum, do it properly, understand exactly which caste is represented how in terms of literacy, in terms of representation, in terms of across state barriers, across linguistic barriers, do the entire exercise if you're doing it for the first time in a century?
No, if you look at the caste census, it does gather a lot of economic data too. So I think his concerns would be well addressed in this caste census, if at all it comes in the way we are discussing. Having said that,
which caste census are you talking about? The one that happened till 2011, because we haven't had a census. You are referring to the census till 2011, right?
If you look at the the data which is coming out, or the things that are coming out for this caste census, you can look at the questionnaire. Right, it is available publicly, and you would see a number of columns that does really address his concerns. But I would also say that, if he's so concerned, Karnataka should have actually taken the lead. And we don't see Himachal and Karnataka actually taking the lead the way Bihar government took the lead during its time. So he has to really, the Congress party has to walk the talk, because it's very easy to throw questions, ask questions, but when it comes to your own party, then you do not really follow it. So that really tells the story whether the intent is correct or not, or is it just some words thrown here and there, and whether there is a honesty in their words or not. And I rest assured that this census would be very, very comprehensive. It is always very comprehensive. You look at the census data, and it will throw a lot of results, which would help in ensuring that the other classes, the OBC as well as the other ones, they are suitably politically as well as economically empowered. I'm sure about it.